What I've been told by my parents is that I was adopted around 4 months old, and the only knowledge that I have of anyone who may have taken care of me before I was adopted was my foster mother, who I have met once when I was very young. So I've only heard stories about my foster mom and the stories that she's told about me to my parents and everything. So the only story I've ever heard of was just that I was kind of a rambunctious child growing up, well, growing up. But other than that, that's all I've ever been told, and I honestly haven't really sought out any further information. I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. But other than that, coming home, that was kind of more of a bigger story that my parents were telling me just because the whole family was there, coming off the plane, and then throwing up all over my dad when he came and got me on the plane. That's a huge hit. But other than that, that's all I've been told. So both my parents moved to Minnesota way before I was ever adopted. I believe they lived in Burnsville, so not that far from where I live now, when they had my sister, and then they moved with my sister to Eagan, which is where we now live. And they were originally from Chicago. They both went to college at University of Illinois, and they're both hitting around 64, 63. So they're kind of older, I guess, the older parents within my group of adoptee friends. Growing up in Eagan wasn't really that big of a deal. It wasn't anything special. It wasn't anything unique, really. And I didn't really become conscious or aware that I was anything different or unique in that sort of way in terms of adoption until probably early middle school. But growing up, I had a lot of friends in the neighborhood. I was usually outside more than I was inside. And my parents probably would say that I was kind of a handful at times. But other than that, just I feel as though I had a pretty normal childhood. My parents, well, first of all, I always hear stories about some adoptees, very few, but some are adopted into families that don't particularly go out of their way to expose Korean culture to their children that they adopt. And I felt as though I was very fortunate enough to be adopted by a family who was, very eager to put me into the culture. In fact, I would probably say they'd force me to go to Korean culture camps more often than not when I was a little kid. And while I was stubborn about it, when I did go, I didn't really have a sense of feeling like I belonged at that point because I was so young, but I felt it wasn't something that bothered me. I would go because there would be other people there and I'd make friends. But as I got older, there were other Korean adoptee camps around that a lot of my Korean adoptee friends would go to, but probably the biggest change in my life that I made was deciding to join the Changmi Korean traditional dance group that's localized here in Minnesota. So my sister had gone through it before I had, and she joined when she was much younger. I played the stubborn part and fought it because I didn't think it was that important. But looking back, I know that my parents wanted me to meet other adoptees. So I joined that dance group, I want to say 2006 or 7, let's say. And I met 4 of my absolute best friends through there, and when I was there, they were all Korean adoptees. Now it's very much varied. We have several Chinese girls, we have several Chinese adoptees, a few Caucasian girls. So it was never a dance group that was specific to adoptees. It was anyone who wanted to learn Korean traditional dance was welcome, and it just so happened during that time it was all adoptees. So right now, I just graduated from the U as a fifth-year senior. I was a victim of being held back, but that was due to my kind of late in my academic life career choice of pursuing a physician's assistant career. So I graduated with a non-traditional degree of communication studies and a minor in Asian languages and literature with a focus on Korean. And so right now I'm taking care of the prerequisite courses for that grad program, and hopefully will be applying soon if I can get through them. But I am also still I am the current vice president of the Asian American Student Union on campus, and it's the largest Asian American student organization in Minnesota with over like 1,000 members that includes alumni. And that has really dug into more of how I feel about myself being adoptee versus the Korean international students that are on campus. There was a time when my friend and I, who is also a Korean adoptee, wanted to join specifically the Korean Student Association. And my sister was the secretary for that organization when she was at the U. And she did sit me down before the semester started and kind of warned me that you're a Korean adoptee. This Korean student organization is mostly Korean international students. So there's going to be a language barrier because I took 3 years of Korean, but I can't ever tell someone that I speak Korean enough to get by. And so there's the language barrier, and then the apparent stigma that comes along with being an adoptee from Korea. So that kind of deterred me from wanting to join that organization. And I knew that being on board for the Asian American organization, there would be a variety of different cultures going on. And that's part of our mission statement, is to educate people about the different cultures. Just observing from what I have on campus, and I say eavesdropping because I literally will eavesdrop when I can, just because I know a little bit of the language. I definitely see the cultural differences on campus, physically and just literally as well. And I just hearing the rumors that Koreans have about adoptees in general, I can't really say if they're 100% true or not, just because I don't know. And I only have a fair few friends who are international Koreans, not adopted. And the ones that I do know are a part of the same organization, and they are extremely open-minded, extremely, if I just had to label it, I'd feel as though they are very much against the normal Korean perspectives in terms of adoption. So one of my friends, his American name is Richard, and he is very much against how Koreans are so selective, everything pertaining to the culture, very against that. In my perspective, he's very much against the norm. But I just have no way of really identifying with international students from Korea because of the language barrier. And not saying that that's, my fault or their fault. It's just, I also don't feel that level of comfort. Now that I've heard about people feeling as though there is a stigma that comes with being adopted, I just can't really get myself to mentally feel comfortable enough to befriend an international Korean student and not at the same time feel afraid that they're thinking, she doesn't know who birthed her. She doesn't know her siblings, if she has any siblings. That's kind of weird to me. And while it's one thing to assume that that's what all international students would think of me if I were to go up and meet a bunch of them, I also feel as though a portion of that is true to some degree. So my sister, who was adopted at 6 months old, I believe, they may be wrong, she grew up in a very she grew up in the same household, but grew up, I think, exposed to different things than I was exposed to. And I can say that my experience was probably very different from hers. And a lot of that does stem from the fact that we are sisters legally, but not biologically. And we often don't really, well, I guess for the most part, we don't talk to each other all that much, and that has been that way for as long as I can remember. I just know that she had the language gene, so she went out of her way to learn Korean at a younger age, and that, I believe, opened a lot of doors for her that it took a long time for, for me to experience the same opportunities. And she knew the language. She went and taught in Korea. She taught English in Korea for a year, and that opened more doors for her. She had a lot of friends that were Korean adoptees and also Korean international students as well. She was definitely exposed and went out of her way to expose herself to those types of opportunities. And that was a decision that I felt she made because she wanted to, for a while, adhere to the Korean culture as much as she could. She wanted to play the part. To this day, my parents say that she plays the part of a Korean international student, or a FOB, I guess. She does. She plays the part. She knows the language. She knows the mannerisms of the culture. She knows how to speak the language the way that natives would. So she has that going for her. And myself, I never saw really adhering to the Korean culture as something that was necessary for me to live my life. I do plan on beginning a search for my birth parents. I have received just some typed up piece of paper from Children's Home about what my birth mother may have been like. And I took that bit of information with a grain of salt because I was told by my dad and a few other people that information that might be found now could very well have been skewed or just changed in some way. Not necessarily lies, but changed. And so that little bit of information, I was excited, but at the same time, it wasn't enough. It wasn't enough information for me to know or for me to be able to feel like I could identify with my birth mother in any sense. But I do plan on opening the search as soon as I can, and life right now is just absolutely chaotic in terms of planning and school. So it is on my bucket list, and I know that as each year goes by, it's kind of getting later and later, and the odds of finding her as the Korean government is getting a little bit more strict it's going to be harder, but the fact that a lot of my close friends have been making connections with their birth parents or with their siblings, it's uplifting news, but at the same time, I feel as though my friends hold the concept of finding their birth parents a lot closer to them than I do. It's something I'd like to have done, but it's not at the top of my list. I can't ever say that I am against it in any way, just my personal bias, but considering the life that I have lived and still live and will live, I feel as though no matter what, I'm probably better off living this life than I would have been if I had not been adopted. And obviously, we talked about how it's objective just because we just don't know. There's just a huge gray area that we don't know what it would have been like to live and grow up in Korea. But the life that I lived is definitely it's worth something, even though sometimes it feels like I'm not going to get anywhere with my degree. I don't know really what I'm going to do, but it's a huge deal to me to be in America. And hearing all of the rumors or the stigmas that go along with being an adoptee and not having a bloodline to trace back to in Korea and what that means, here it doesn't matter. My blood type doesn't matter, whereas in Korea, I don't know my blood type, and that's a big deal apparently. So, no, adoption, the fact that the government wants to close adoption down in Korea it's upsetting, but I also feel as though I'm saying that because I realize how fortunate I have been and how I see the fortune of my Korean adoptee friends who could say the same thing, that they've lived a life that was probably extremely different from what they thought it would be had they not been adopted, what possibly their birth parents thought it would be being adopted or not being adopted. So I'm 100% in favor of it still.